In his second inaugural address, Franklin Roosevelt declared that his administration was determined to make every American citizen the subject of his country's interest and concern, and that we, that is his administration, will never regard any faithful law-abiding group within our borders as superfluous. He said that the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, it is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. This was the essence of New Deal liberalism, to use government power to ensure every law-abiding group shared in the nation's economic progress, and to guarantee that no one suffered deprivation. From the 1930s through the 1960s, New Deal liberalism was the dominant force in American politics. For many Americans, it was inconceivable that it would ever go away. Even when a Republican, Dwight Eisenhower, became president in the 1950s, he refused to go after the New Deal. Eisenhower in fact expanded the New Deal by creating the national highways and extending Social Security benefits to domestic and agricultural workers. Eisenhower opined that, should any political party attempt to abolish Social Security unemployment insurance and eliminate labor laws and farm programs, you would not hear of that party again in our political history. This video is the first of a trilogy that will attempt to explain why an order based on the idea that individual freedom was inseparable from collective economic security and equality, an order that at one point seemed perpetual, won away in favor of modern conservatism, which claims that government, in the words of Ronald Reagan, is not the solution to our problems, but is the problem. It's important to understand that conservatism is not one thing. Social conservatism contends that the United States is a Christian nation and therefore should be governed by traditional Christian Judeo values. A second strand is economic conservatism, or libertarianism, which rails against big government and exalts so-called free markets. Finally, there is neoconservatism, which favors a powerful activist military. The story of the fall of the New Deal is how these three strands of conservatism were tied together, and as this trilogy of videos will show, it was capitalists, hell-bent on destroying the labor-empowering aspects of the New Deal, who led the way. Beyond United States history, the way that capitalists organized almost instantly, and persisted for decades, to unravel the New Deal order, teaches us why social democracy is always fragile in a capitalist system. Though other countries have much more robust welfare states than the US, they too have seen assaults on their social programs, whether it be through austerity policies following the Great Recession, or ever-increasing calls from neoliberals to liberalize their economies. Moreover, the more successful the state is in creating welfare-enhancing institutions, the more capitalists ogle these institutions as opportunities for privatization and profitization. In this video, I will focus on the origins of the merger between social and economic conservatism in the 1930s, what one scholar has called Christian libertarianism. If you find this video entertaining or informative, please remember to press the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. Before the New Deal, businessmen in general had not been against big government. Republican administrations, which represented big business in America, funded the transcontinental railroads, the construction of canals, and implemented the highest tariffs in the world. They also liberally used the military and National Guards to crush labor movements. Initially, businessmen supported the New Deal. They liked the National Recovery Administration, which suspended antitrust laws and allowed capitalists to set the prices and production standards for their industries. Even Barry Goldwater, one of the most virulent critics of the New Deal, proudly displayed the NRA Blue Eagle in his retail store. But there was one thing businessmen hated about the NRA, and that was Section 7A, which gave workers the right to form unions that businesses were required to collectively bargain with. So in 1934, major industrialists like the DuPont brothers formed the American Liberty League. Through the American Liberty League, they argued that the New Deal was a threat to property and to the Constitution. Other business organizations, such as the National Association of Manufacturers, increased their public relations budget 20-fold to attack the New Deal and to prevent a Roosevelt re-election. It failed. Despite a prediction by the Literary Digest that Alf Landon would win big, Roosevelt won re-election in what at that point had been the largest landslide ever in a contested election. It was clear after 1936 that a direct assault on the New Deal's economic programs would never work. As the president of the National Association of Manufacturers lamented, facts alone cannot check the virus of economic collectivism. Capitalists would have to innovate more insidious tactics to defeat pro-labor economic policies. It was in social conservatism that capitalists foresaw a path towards turning the population against the New Deal. These strategies came right out of California, the state which produced the three most consequential conservative presidents of the 20th century, Herbert Hoover, Richard Nixon, and Ronald Reagan. In 1934, a socialist, Upton Sinclair, ran on the Democratic ticket for governor in California. His platform called for the confiscation of idle lands and factories to organize them into worker co-ops. This was part of his EPIC, or End Poverty in California, campaign. EPIC constituted a threat to the most dominant economic interest in California, agro-industrialists. California had the biggest farms in the country, with 10% of farmers controlling 80% of the land. According to a congressional study, over a third of all big farms in the U.S. were in California. Growers were wary about how the New Deal could inspire leftist reforms. Even though Section 7A of the National Industrial Recovery Act did not cover agricultural workers, it still inspired a massive labor movement in the fields of California through the formation of the Cannery and Agricultural Workers Industrial Union. In response to massive strikes, growers did what they always had done. They violently repressed them. They used their control over local and state police to arrest and to beat strikers and labor organizers. But the Roosevelt administration did something shocking. It threatened to withhold relief money from the Agricultural Adjustment Act if capitalists kept beating farm workers. Then the government negotiated a settlement, a 15-cent a day raise for workers out of the 40 cents that they wanted. From the funding of transcontinental railroads to connect California to the markets of the East Coast, to the construction of canals and the provision of agricultural research, agro-capitalists took for granted that the government would always act in their interests. So when the Roosevelt administration only tepidly supported labor, growers reacted with the fervor of a betrayed lover. They organized, creating associated farmers, which of course consisted of big growers, but also the largest corporations in California, including the Bank of America, the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and the Southern Pacific Railroad. And during the 1934 gubernatorial campaign, they attacked Sinclair not by critiquing his economic proposals, which were very popular, but by linking his socialism with potentially other radical threats to California's cultural institutions. They said that it would destroy the patriarchal household by giving jobs and money to women, who would then no longer have to depend on their husbands. The program, they claimed, would also attract immigrants, particularly black immigrants, into the state, who would intermix with whites. And they even said it was a threat to the church. Why? Sinclair was a socialist, which, in their eyes, was the same thing as communism. And what do we know about communists? They're atheists. So EPIC, they claimed, would blur the color line, destroy the authority of fathers and husbands in the household, and abolish the church. This worked. Despite the popularity of the New Deal and of the Democratic Party in the 1930s, Upton Sinclair lost the gubernatorial campaign of 1934. What we see here is the exploitation of cultural anxieties about race, gender, and religion to defeat what had been a popular economic program. California will become ground zero for the rightward shift in religion as well. Today we tend to associate ardent religious belief with conservatism, but that had not always been the case. In the progressive era, reforms were pushed by advocates of the social gospel, who believed that the scriptures mandated the use of government power to eradicate poverty. The imagery and language that Franklin Roosevelt used in his speeches was also biblical. In his first inaugural address, he talked about throwing the money changers out of the temple of civilization, a reference to a passage in the Gospels. Roosevelt said that they had no vision, and where there was no vision, the people perish. This was a verse from Proverbs. But there is a conservative effort beginning in the 1930s to make religion the province of the right. And a particularly important figure in this movement was James Fifield Jr., who was a Congregationalist pastor from Southern California. With funding from millionaires such as the DuPont brothers, James Fifield founded Spiritual Mobilization, an organization devoted towards promoting free markets and Christianity. Through radio programs, books, pamphlets, magazines, and sponsorship of sermons and lecture circuits for conservative ministers, Spiritual Mobilization disseminated a message which claimed that capitalism was the economic counterpart to Christianity. The argument goes, Christianity is a religion about an individual's responsibility and choice to follow God. In a similar vein, capitalism was about individual choices and responsibility. Any form of collectivism, therefore, threatened both Christianity and capitalism. That will be the message propagated by very popular Christian evangelists later on in the 20th century, most notably by Billy Graham, who's one of the most influential preachers in U.S. history, and certainly the most in the 20th century. At a 1952 rally, Billy Graham pontificated that the Garden of Eden was a paradise with no union dues, no labor leaders, no snakes, no disease. He insisted that a truly Christian worker would not stoop to take unfair advantage of his employer by ganging up on him in a union. Strikes, to Graham, were selfish and sinful. What is also important to understand is that Billy Graham did not become an international superstar organically. He was supported heavily by millionaires. Graham's most important patron was Texas oil millionaire Sid Richardson, who had little use for Graham's religion, but shared a similar faith in free enterprise. These are just the seeds, though. Despite these tactics, the most important conservative victories in this early period were still simply about economics. During World War II, business organizations such as NAM and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce went on a public relations blitz. They flooded magazines such as Reader's Digest with horror stories of big government and big labor. Fighting a total war caused a lot of inflation, but business organizations claim that it was excessive labor wages and labor power that caused it. This argument appears to have been very persuasive, as in 1946 Republicans won 55 more seats of the House of Representatives and 12 more seats in the Senate, giving them a majority in either branch of Congress for the first time in 14 years. Southern Democrats were also worried about organized labor spreading into the South. Together, Republicans and Southern Democrats in 1947 passed over a presidential veto, the Taft-Hartley Act. Taft-Hartley stopped the spread of organized labor in the United States. Most importantly, it did this by allowing states to pass so-called right-to-work laws. What a right-to-work law means is that a union cannot demand membership as a condition of employment. However, all benefits and services for union members must be extended to non-union members. This includes wages, but also union-specific services. For example, unions in right-to-work states are required to represent non-union members in wrongful termination cases. For those of you familiar with economic theory, you should know this creates the problem of free riding. Let's put it this way. Suppose I offer you a car, and I say to you that you can either pay me for the car or you can get the car for free. Which option are you going to choose? The free car, right? Well, the same thing happens with unionism in right-to-work states. You can pay union dues if you want to, but they aren't necessary for you to get access to union benefits. This will, of course, then greatly weaken unions, and in the right-to-work laws, you can see some of the ways in which economic conservatives were okay with some forms of government power. If a union wants to negotiate a deal with an employer making union membership a condition of employment, shouldn't they be able to do that? Economic conservatives say that the state has a right to limit the kinds of deals that unions can negotiate, and to force unions to provide benefits and services to non-members. Taft-Hartley will also limit the kinds of workers who can join unions. Managers are not allowed, neither are independent contractors. So if you are, for example, an Uber driver, you can't join a union. It outlaws wildcat strikes, sympathy strikes, and secretary boycotts, all kinds of strikes which would allow workers to unite across industries and companies. Taft-Hartley, as I've stated, was a major achievement for economic conservatism, and it limited unions to the Northeast and Midwest. In the 1950s, millionaires threw their weight behind Dwight Eisenhower, who they believed would aggressively promote their anti-New Deal vision of Christian libertarianism. He disappointed them. Though Eisenhower emphasized the importance of religion, his emphasis was on a more generalized intensity of faith than on any particular religious practice. Richard Nixon would more directly try to politicize patriotism and piety. According to historian Kevin Kruse, Nixon's first speech as president was basically a sermon, replete with references to God and to the Bible, the Spirit of Christ, and even the angels.
To a crisis of the Spirit, we need an answer of the Spirit.
Nixon would also implement Sunday prayer services at the White House. Notably, all the clergy invited to deliver sermons and prayers were conservatives connected to major political constituencies. The guests for these White House church services usually included campaign donors, such as the heads of AT&T, Chrysler, General Electric, General Motors, Goodyear, PepsiCo, and other leading corporations. Ronald Reagan went even further than Nixon in the politics of piety by pushing for school prayer, Bible reading, and abortion restrictions. He also asserted liberals were intolerant of religion, and this strategy worked. Reagan won 66% of the evangelical vote in 1984.
There is sin and evil in the world, and we're enjoined by Scripture and the Lord Jesus to oppose it with all our might.
Note that his Democratic predecessor, Jimmy Carter, was an evangelical Christian. From Reagan on, the public religiosity of presidents would become more central. The 8 presidents from FDR to Carter invoked the blessing of God in less than half of their speeches. Since Reagan, presidents have invoked the blessing of God in 9 out of every 10 speeches. I want to end this video by doubling back to the Taft-Hartley Act, which seems almost out of place in this video. But Taft-Hartley mattered because it was passed through the cooperation of Southern Democrats and Republicans. Transforming Democrats in the South into Republicans is a very important part of the story about the triumph of conservatism in the 20th century. A powerful appeal to Southern Democrats will be the politics of piety and patriotism. There is nothing inevitable about this transformation, and how it happens will be explored in future videos. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative or entertaining, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe.